My people, my friends, welcome to the final recap of the regular season. Week 14 has concluded, ladies and gentlemen, for Warrenton's finest fantasy football league. Again, I am Jeff Darling, your commissioner, in what I think has been one of the best seasons of fantasy football to date that we have done. This has been 14 weeks of thrilling matchups, comeback from behind victories, stunning upsets, huge blowouts, crushing defeat, heartbreak, anger, betrayal, all the emotions, except for happiness usually. That seems to elude me most times in fantasy football. But let's go ahead and just get into the recap. We had 2 playoff spots, and we had a championship that were up for grabs, as well as the top seeding in the playoffs. So a lot was up for grabs. Where did things stand? We had 2 teams, Jason and Matt, who were in line for the playoff spot. But we had 2 other teams, Hannah and Carlos, who were vying for those final spots. Hannah needed Jason and Matt to both lose, and she needed to outscore Jason by 60 to be able to win the tiebreaker for points scored. And Matt lost to me, I might add. Second time this season. Matt, no big deal. Jason lost, and Hannah won. So 3 out of the 4 things needed to happen did in fact happen. Unfortunately, Hannah, you did not make the playoffs by just a measly total of 35 points for your total points scored this season. 35, that's like 2 points a game. Maybe less, actually. Maybe a little bit more. My math is a little fuzzy. But very close. Hard fought. Way to finish strong. We had a couple people finish strong and not make it into the playoffs. Michael and Hannah, I think, both finished on 3-game winning streaks and yet did not make the playoffs. And a couple people limped into the playoffs. Mike, you started the season very strong, didn't do so well the second half, so we'll see how that plays out for you. But on to the championship. It came off. Brandon was 3-10. Weasel and Dan were with 4-9 going into the final week. It came down to, if Brandon lost, he ate the chip. If he won, it came down to a points battle, points scored. Tiebreaker goes to the lowest scoring team, would have to eat the chip. Brandon, in fact, beat Dan. The Weasel lost. So it came down to who scored the least amount of points over the season between Brandon, the Weasel, and Dan. And Dan, by 36 points. Paul outscored you by 36 points over the course of the season. And we all know that we weren't going to make Paul eat the chip because he's a respectable adult and the rest of us are not. But luckily, it didn't have to come down to that. I didn't have to call up the operator of Warrenton Chick-fil-A and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Paul, sir, eat this chip." Dan, we're all very much looking forward to you eating the chip. I hope that you do not get hospitalized. If anybody wants to chip in for the chip, throw a couple bucks Dan's way. It does cost like $20, but that was the risk. You knew what would happen. You also happen to have the least amount of signed players over the course of the season, so if you neglect your garden, the plants will die. That's all I'm going to say there. So, you make your bed, now you got to lie in it. Disappointed. Just kidding. So, let me go into a couple things. We've got the playoffs now. Let's just see where people finished in the regular season. Best record for the season was Greg, 11-3. Next up, record-wise, was Sean at 10-4. I was at 10-4. Mike was at 8-6. Matt, Jason, Hannah, all 7-7. Michael, Cup, and Carlos, 6-8. Brandon, Paul, and Dan finished 4-10. But where do things stand as far as the rankings for the playoffs go? 1 seed with a bye is Greg from the East Division. From the Western Division, Mike Weiss at 8-6 gets a bye week. Everyone else, Sean is going to be going up against Jason. I will be going up against Matt for the 3rd time this season. We shall be facing each other. So let's do a quick playoff preview. Where do things stand on that? Jeff, your team averaged. Actually, let's take a step back here. I want to take a quick deep dive into points scored and points against, because this played a pretty big factor into this season, right? So Greg averaged 104.7 points scored a game. Only had 93 points scored against him per game. So you can see where that 11-3 record came up. The lowest amount of points scored against on average was Greg, your 93 points scored against. So you apparently paid off the schedule maker. Mike averaged 104.6, so basically identical to Greg, and had 103.7 points against him scored. So you only outscored your opponents by 0.9 over the course of the season. That explains your 8-6 record. Next up, Sean averaged 121 points a game, only had 97 points scored against him. But when you outscored the entire league, you could have taken the highest points against, which was Brandon's average of 116, not to get ahead of myself, and you still probably would have ended up with a fairly good record, if not above average. Next up, myself, I averaged 116 points a game, averaged 100 points scored against me. Matt averaged 118 points a game and had 108 scored against him. So Matt, you scored a ton, but you also got outscored in a couple key matchups. And so, you know, it's weird to see you outscoring your opponents by 10 each week and finishing with a 7-7 record. So I guess when you lost big. And when you won big. I think you had a couple blowouts towards the end of the season, going both directions. Jason, this is probably my favorite thing that happened this whole season. Jason, whose team name is Your Pretty Average Team, scored 106.4 points for and averaged 105.3 against. So a 1.1 point margin. Finished 7-7. Finished the season ranked 6th out of 12 teams. The Pretty Average Team, Jason, you just got to probably rename your team to the Slightly Above Average Team. Maybe you'll finish like 9-5 next year. So just, you know, word of wisdom for you next year. Found that really funny. Hannah finished averaging 103.8 a game, 101.6 against. So pretty evenly matched, and that makes sense why Hannah, you finished 7-7. But again, strong finish to the season. Michael Cupp, also a strong finish. Surprisingly 6-8 despite being outscored. 103 on average he scored, 108 against him. So you just had bad matchups each week. 103 is not bad. It's basically, Hannah, you and Michael were less than a point away from where Greg scored each week and where Mike scored each week. It just came down to, again, who are you playing? Were they, you know, it's just the random luck of fantasy. Next up, Carlos, you get the reward or the prize for the worst scoring team in our league. You averaged only 88.8 points a game. It doesn't matter who you were playing, except apparently it did, because you averaged against you 100 points, yet you finished with a 6-8 record, which means I don't know how you finished with a 6-8 record when you only score 88 points a game, but you did it. Congratulations. You almost finished at 500. It looks like, and I just want to address the trade elephant in the room. When Carlos and Sean made the trade that was heard around the world, Carlos was 1-4 with those same players. Sean with his was 2-3. Both teams needed to shake things up. It was, you know, by all outward appearances, it looked like at the time, I mean, who's going to make any guff about someone trading away their quarterback and wide receiver who have gotten them to a 1-4 record? But what happened? Sean went on a 7-game win streak. Carlos then went to be the lowest scoring team in the league. That's why I don't do trades. I never do trades because, you know, Sean, you try to trade me a dude, and he's on the free agents right now because he's terrible. But at the moment, he was good. You just never know. I have too much anxiety about trading away someone that was good, and then they or bad or whatever. I just can't trade. Can't do it. So Carlos, good job at managing a 6-8 record despite, you know, not having a high scoring team. Next, Brandon finished, he was in last place basically the whole season. Technically, same record as the next two guys, but he scored more points on average per game. Brandon averaged 93.7, but averaged, again, schedule, 116.7 points scored against him on average per week. Now, I do need to bring up here that one reason this stat might be so skewed is what I call it's just the biggest blowout of the season. In week 6, Brandon lost to Sean 183-47. And that's just pretty demoralizing. And that really messes up a lot of... I just don't know how you score 47 points in a single game. I think that was Sean's like quarterback and tight end scored that much. That's pretty crazy, but again, that kind of messes up stats. But at the same time, Brandon, you had some pretty sour luck there. I probably should have done the math on what happens if I Take away those, what's then your average points scored and average points against? It's probably much closer. 1 week can ruin everything. Next up, Paul scored 92 points a game, averaged 1 of 7 against. So that's a lot of points scored against with not the highest producing team. The lowest, Team 12, team touchdown, 89.4 a game. So right above what Carlos was averaging by 0.6 a game, and having 99.5 scored against. So kind of interesting that you scored 1 point more than Carlos, and on average had 1 point less scored against you. Yet he finished 6-8, and you finished 4-10. I don't know what happened. By all accounts, Carlos should be where you are, and you should be where Carlos is. But hey, here we are. So that's a quick deep dive on how people are scoring. The reason I mention that is because projections right now, I don't think people have done their lineups yet for the playoff game. So I'm just going to go off based on average points scored and then past team history as we look up the matchups here. So for the playoffs, we've got the third-ranked Jeff Boys, averaged 116 a game, going against the fourth-ranked Gone Fishin', who averaged 118. However, in week 8, I beat Matt 173 to 150, and then last week I beat him 98.18 to 97.5. So I'm 2-0 against Matt in the regular season, which means he's coming for me. I really wish that, because I think, Matt, you're going to beat me probably, and that'll stink to sweep you in the regular season and lose in the playoffs. Or maybe I sweep you all 3. That would be great. Let's hope that happens, me. All right, next up, Sean, Uncle Touchdown, averages 121 points a game, going against Jason's team, who averages 106 points. They met up in week 5, the final week before Sean traded everyone away and changed his fortunes. In that game, Jason soundly beat Uncle Touchdown 148.6 to 120.2. So pretty interesting. We'll see what happens. Jason, can you get some of that early season magic back? Get rid of this 3-game losing streak that you're riding into the playoffs on? One certainly hopes so, if that one isn't Sean. Next up, and then Greg and Mike, the 1 seeds on each division, are on their bye week. Moving into the losers bracket. Again, we want to do that $5 buy-in for the low 6 teams. The winner would get the $25 back. That's both buy-ins. You're able to end the season even. And then second place would take the $5, at least take their loser bracket buy-in back. So everyone try to do that. I'll send out a text to everybody to send the $5 to Michael Cup. Speaking of which, Cup goes against Queen. In that week, the previous matchup in week 9, the Queen beat Michael 163 to 81. So that wasn't great, Michael. She doubled your score. And average points scored against Hannah, you averaged 103.8 a game. Michael, you averaged 103.4. So this could be a very close game. Both teams are actually pretty hot right now. This is probably one of the biggest ones in the loser bracket. Very exciting matchup. Next up, bye week against Cruisin'. In week 5, bye week beat Carlos 97.8 to 86.5. And like I said earlier, Brandon averages 93.7 a game, Carlos 88.8. So anyone, it's kind of a toss-up in my opinion. And then lastly, Dan goes against the Weasel. In week 4, the Weasel beat Dan 104.3 to 87.6. Weasel averages 92, Dan averages 89. Dan, I hope that you can eke out a win here so you don't lose the chip and get eliminated in the first round of your losers bracket. But guys, there's a lot that's at stake here. This has been a very fun regular season, mostly because I finished 10-4. If I finished 4-10 and had to eat the chip, I might not agree with that sentiment identically. But here we are. It's been a fun season. Playoffs are very exciting. Everyone check your lineup, except for you, Matt. Remember, you play in 2 weeks. It's just a practice round. In fact, you probably want to take everyone out of your lineup. So, yeah. Anyways, great week, guys. I'll see you. This is a very long video. I apologize, but there's a lot to recap. Oh, one last thing. No, I was going to go through, at the beginning of the season, what people's, projected finishing was. I'll do it. Greg was projected to finish 10th, ended up finishing 1st. Mike was projected to finish 1st, ended up finishing 4th. Sean was projected to finish 9th, finished in 2nd. I was projected 4th, finished in 3rd. Matt was projected 11th, finished in 5th. Good jump up there. Jason was projected to finish 2nd, finished in 6th place. Hannah, 8th, finished in 7th. Michael was projected to finish in 12th place, finished in 8th place. Carlos, 7th, finished in 9th, down 2. Brandon was projected 3rd, finished in 10th. down 7. Paul was projected to finish 5th, finished in 11th. Dan in 6th, and finished in 12th. So the highest rise was Greg, jumped up 9 spaces. Sean jumped up 7. Matt jumped up 6. The biggest drop was Brandon dropping at 7, and then Paul and Dan dropping 6. I was pretty accurately projected. I guess I did a pretty good job drafting. What can I say? Your commissioner knows what he's doing for now. I really shouldn't be saying this because I'm going to lose in the first round again. I've never won. I've never won in fantasy. I've never come in first. I've been the first seed a lot. So hopefully my strategy of being the 3 seed pays off, or the 4 seed technically. Anyway, I'm done rambling. Have a great week, guys. I'm going to Honduras tomorrow, so I'll be watching this. Probably not watching the games, actually. Yeah. So anyway, peace out.